Hello, friends, and welcome to the September 20th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and have a conversation about how you can engage in the process. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Engagement Director, and today's episode is brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas and Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas. So to set the stage, we are recording shortly after the Texas legislature convened for the third called special session. Y'all, this has been quite the year. As of now, we expect that this session will largely focus on three issues: redistricting, the allocation of $16 billion in funds from the American Rescue Plan Act, which we discussed last week with Every Texan's Eva DeLuna Castro in our Budget Blockbuster edition. And finally, the legislature's continued attempt to bully transgender children. And before we jump into that conversation, that's going to be our topic for today, I want to remind listeners that tomorrow evening, Tuesday, September 21st, from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m., Texas Impact will be hosting a Redistricting 101 webinar with redistricting experts Bonnie Bruce and Genevieve Van Cleve. Y'all, I probably don't have to tell you if you're listening to this podcast, but redistricting is a big deal that will impact public policy in Texas for the next decade, if not more. And I know many of you have questions about that process, so please register to join us at texasimpact.org and invite your friends to that party. But today, y'all, we're once again forced to talk about the Texas legislature's attempts to bully transgender children as they once again try to take up the anti-trans bill that would require students to play sports based on the gender assigned on their birth certificate. And here with us for that conversation are Reverend Naomi Brown with a Pride Center in San Antonio. Naomi, thanks for being with us.
We should unmute. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We're getting the hang of the Zoom, but there's always going to be a couple chances. I'll inevitably do that today too. But thanks for being here, Reverend Dr. Neil Cazares Thomas with Cathedral of Hope, UCC in Dallas. Neil, thanks for being with us.
Always good to be joining Scott and also with these esteemed colleagues.
Absolutely. The one I'll be especially nice to today, Annaliese Cothron, who is a Unitarian Universalist, but also a Texas Impact board member. Annaliese, thanks for the time.
Thanks, Scott. I will make sure to be nice to you too.
Oh, I appreciate that. And finally, good friend of the program, Reverend Diane McGehee of Bering Church in Houston. Diane, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. It's my honor to speak on behalf of and with the trans community. So thank you for including me.
Well, I do appreciate all of you being here. And today is a big day. We always record on Mondays, but as we're recording, there's a lot going on at the Capitol as the legislature has convened for the third special session. I want to start with Annaliese because today, while we're speaking, there's a demonstration going on at the Capitol by Friends of Equality. So can you fill us in on what's happening at the Capitol right now?
Yeah, so right now at the Capitol, led by Equality Texas and several other organizations, there's a demonstration representing the 68 and counting bills that have been filed against LGBTQ Texans, predominantly transgender kids. And so there's been a lot of advocacy happening because, again, Texas is actually leading this throughout the entire nation. Now, let's be really clear here. This is a push from most extremist conservative agendas in every state in the United States. But Texas is actually leading this with the most number of bills filed. And not only that, the most draconian and egregious bills filed of any in the nation. And this is a very specific strategy. And so there are many people here saying, this is the fourth session. We're tired. You are clearly bullying and harming our children, and you have to stop. And you need to see the damage that you're doing, which is part of the demonstration today.
you use that number 68 when we talked, and I was talking about it in my Sunday school class the other day, and they said 68, that seems like an awful lot. And my recollection of the session, I actually thought it might have been more, because it seemed like every day we'd be watching and there'd be some bill that had nothing to do with transgender youth, and all of a sudden there'd be an amendment that somebody tried to tie on that.
Yeah, it's actually it's interesting that you mentioned that, Scott, because the fact that this has nothing to do with anything is what advocates have now been saying for almost a year. So in particular, this session focuses on transgender children playing sports. But this, as we know, is not about sports. If it was about sports, they wouldn't be trying to take away transgender kids' health care. If it was about sports, they wouldn't be attacking healthcare providers. If it was about sports, they wouldn't be trying to make me, the mom of a transgender kid, a child abuser. What this boils down to is discrimination and bullying against a vulnerable population that actually deserves our legislators' protection. And so it's really interesting that we see these legislators trying to tack amendments onto bills that have nothing to do with transgender kids, because ultimately this bill doesn't have anything to do with the health and well-being of our children. It has everything to do with discrimination and bullying and pushing through an extremist agenda that nobody wants to see. You know, now the data are very clear here. 70% of Texans do not want to see anti-LGBTQ legislation passed. And unfortunately, there's a handful of extremist legislators who are refusing to represent their constituents and the Texas majority, including all of the faith traditions that are represented throughout Texas. We want to help our kids. We want to promote our children thriving in a healthy community. And so I actually just wanted to expand on that point while I had the opportunity, is that none of these bills represent any actual issues that we're seeing in Texas. They're all very superfluous to the idea that trans kids are causing harm. And in fact, legislators are the ones harming children.
Well, Annaliese, I think you're maybe the one person on the Zoom that doesn't have a Reverend in front of their name, but I feel like you just gave us a pretty solid sermon for today. So I appreciate you kicking us off in that way. I'll certainly give you an amen. So changing to kind of some of the faith components of this, a couple of weeks ago, I had a chance to talk with Jessica Shortall about during our legislative wrap-up series, and we talked about the lack of action on these trans bills and amendments. And we had hoped that would be the end of it. But here we are once again having to have the conversation. And when Jessica and I were talking, it really did strike me, and it made me do some soul searching myself about the importance of the faith community engaging in these conversations, especially because so many of them are being driven by very loud, conservative, evangelical Christians. And so we talked about the importance of mainstream, progressive people of faith speaking up from a faith perspective in support of equality. So I want to give you all that opportunity. I'll start with you, Reverend Diane McGehee, and we'll kind of go around the horn. But what from your faith tradition leads you to support equality and oppose bills that bully trans kids? I know maybe that should seem like a simple answer, but apparently we need to state it out loud. So what from your faith tradition leads you to support equality for these kids?
Well, the Christian community ought to be leading the way and protecting them. I mean, Jesus is very clear that if you do it unto the least of these and you fail to welcome a child, you're failing to welcome Jesus. And that if anyone, particularly followers of Jesus, causes one of these little ones to stumble, it'd be better for them that they put a millstone around their necks, and that we are harming children. And there is nothing scripturally that supports not supporting transgender children, young people, individuals. In fact, the Apostle Paul's really clear in Galatians that in Christ there's no more male or female. I mean, this obsession we have with gender identity is not biblical. It's not scriptural. And the Psalms are very clear that each person is individually made by God. And what we need to be doing as faith people is realizing God has gifted us with transgender children, that these children are not a mistake, that what God is doing through these children is calling us into a much greater openness about gender fluidity and embracing the presence of God in whatever way God creatively chooses to manifest God's self, and that they are a gift, not to be feared and punished, but actually supported and protective. And the Christian community ought to be out front on this. Yeah, so I can say more, but I'll let some of my colleagues also jump in here.
Neil, I assume you're not going to disagree with your colleague, but any thoughts from you? How do you approach this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with Diane at all. I mean, I think if you look at the whole of the creation story from Genesis 2, when God took a rib out of Adam and created a whole woman, there was enough woman in Adam to create a whole one. So this whole sense of gender fluidity is right there, right from the very beginning. Diane, you're right. The Apostle Paul says it very clear that there's neither male nor female. This whole sense of this discrimination, and let's be honest, all of this is really code language for discrimination. This whole religious liberty laws, it's really just code for discrimination and putting it into law. And Scott, I actually have a hard time even using the word Christian for what has become a nationalistic movement of hijacking Christianity to place into our legislation such rules that divide our people up. And, my whole sense of purpose as a follower of Jesus is to bring about equality and unity of the body of Christ. And all these people seem to be concerned about is just carving us up and shaping us out and trying to bring in a nationalistic Christianity in a country that we're supposed to thrive on the separation of church and state. I support the separation of church and hate. And my faith reminds me of that every single day. And so I will stand with my transgender siblings, and I will continue to fight for them. But let's not underestimate the harm that's being done just in the rhetoric of the words that are used by conservative evangelicals that are neither religious or right. And we as a progressive people need to raise our voices much, much higher and louder. And we've been too passive for too many years of being this nicey, let's let them take our foothold. And we're not progressive Christians, we're Christians. And we need to raise our voice because it is imperative that in order for Christianity to survive in this generation and for this era, we need to kick out the crazies and bring back what it means to be a follower of Jesus.
I want to come back. I saw a couple of amens on mute there, Neil. I'm going to give that one to you. I want to come back, Naomi, to this idea of the harm that even having these conversations have. So let's put a pin in that for a second, but also want to give you the opportunity to share why you do this work or why it's important for faith voices to be involved in this conversation.
Scott, I want to start out by saying Jesus gave us one new commandment: to love one another. And Jesus was so cool. There were no parameters around that love. It just said, love one another. And we have taken the words of Christ, and Christ never said anything about putting all of this harmful, hateful language in your mouths and saying that you're doing it in the name of God. I have two jobs. I'm also a clinical therapist. And part of what I do is recognize that every time we hurt a child, that hurt lives in that child forever because the body keeps score. And we are constantly doing damage to children that are beautiful, precious gifts of God. God doesn't make mistakes. So I'm so confused about how we are at a third session. This is exhausting. God doesn't make mistakes. You are attacking children for no other reason than something that has to do with you think you're better than everyone else. This sense of privilege of going to 3 sessions and dealing with stuff that is not a problem. For someone who believes in fiscal responsibility, what we're doing in the name of physical responsibility is totally abuse. So when I got the emails, I'm exhausted, but sure, I'll keep screaming. I'll keep screaming from the mountaintop because I have to. So,
yes,
my soapbox.
I'm agreeing with you on the exhaustion of all of this, y'all. This is This has been quite the year, and I have no idea why we're still dealing with non-issues. Annaliese, you come at this from many different perspectives, but one is from a faith perspective. Can you say a few words about that?
Yeah, I would love to. So, as Scott mentioned at the beginning, I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and the phrase that I keep repeating whenever I talk to legislators, whenever I'm in committee hearings, is that we believe in the inherent dignity and worth of every person on this planet. And we believe in a concept called the interconnected web of life. And so that means harm to one person is harm to everyone, because at the end of the day, we are all deserving of inherent dignity and worth and the respect that comes with that as Texans and as people, including children. And that when you harm one of us, it brings harm to all of us in one way or another. And that's the concept that I keep trying to sort of, as a woman of faith and as a member of a Texan community, I hold that concept very dear. And I think it's really important that we talk about the harm. And Scott, you mentioned that too. And if it's okay, I'll kind of segue into that, because the harm is not nebulous. It's not confusing. It's palpable. The harm has been done already, and our legislators are continuing it. I know personally, as a parent, the thing that sticks out in my mind from the first regular session was hearing the senators debate the child abuse bills, SB 1646. It was introduced in the Senate and sent through. And I heard one senator say the author of that bill was doing the will of God. And he said that on the floor of the Senate. This was a bill that would have made me go to jail for allowing medically necessary care that was recommended by a doctor to my child. And he said that was the will of God. And that was one of the most offensive things that I have heard maybe in my lifetime, to say that attacking a child and putting them potentially into a foster care system, pulling them from a loving home and putting them into a foster care system was the will of God. Because it's not. That is disgusting and that is evil. And that harm lives with us. As a parent, I can't tell you how scared, how terrified I was staring at the screen and having people say, I hope you go to jail just for allowing your child to exist. I can also tell you that I have been told that point blank in the Capitol, on the floor of the Capitol, in the rotunda. I've been told to my face that my child was a freak, and two, that they would never be loved and that they didn't deserve love. And I'm not exaggerating. Those are verbatim things that have been said to my face as a parent of a transgender child. My kid is 9 years old. How, in what universe do you think my child doesn't deserve love? This is the kind of disgusting rhetoric that parents are dealing with, and it's harmful to the entire community. Transgender kids become transgender adults. They're still Texans too. They're still here to invest in the community and thrive. So you're actually engendering danger and harm to a whole population of Texans starting at a young age. And we know that because the transgender suicide hotline calls to that have increased 70% in Texas. It's not just my anecdotal experience. We have hard data to say you are causing people to want to die because you won't stop with this legislation. And so as a member of a faith community, that's what I come back to, is you're causing harm that's irreparable at this point. I will never, ever forget what has gone on this year. I will never forget being told that my child was disgusting, that my child was wrong and messed up. And actually, this has been very therapeutic to hear all of these faith traditions represented just here in this call and say, that is not the will of God. That is not what any faith community genuinely thinks. Most people think that children are here to be loved and nurtured and grown into adults that are happy and healthy and thriving. And so just hearing the few voices here say, absolutely not, never, we're standing up against this as a united faith community is so helpful and helps to mitigate some of the harm that's being done by our Texas legislators.
So I was about to pitch a question to Naomi about like House and Senate committees, but I feel like in response to Annaliese's testimony that she just shared, I'm going to open it up to our pastor friends and see if anybody has a pastoral word that they would want to add after that.
This is the sin of the church. I mean, this is a sin by the church, and it's the church's leadership that's going to be held accountable because, you know, we just had a service a couple of weeks ago for a young trans woman whose family was told by the church that if she didn't straighten herself up, they were to throw her out of the house, you know. And I deal weekly, sometimes daily, with people who have been harmed as children, as young people, by having to defend who God made them to be. And, you know, as a vulnerable child, the wounds that we are inflicting with no biblical basis whatsoever for this kind of attack on children. It's all fear based on not having understanding, based on an unwillingness to embrace difference. God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but of a sound mind and of wisdom. And we know that that transgender children are gifts, and they need to hear that again and again and again. And the church should be the ones affirming them and standing for them. And so that's on us. And it's a theology that is harming people. It's a theology of exclusion. It's a theology that's really, you know, a heterosexual privileged theology that has nothing to do with the gospel of Christ. And so, yeah, we are harming children. We are actively harming children, and that's a sin, and we'll be held accountable for it. And so we've got to stand for these kids. A child should never have to defend their identity. And the deep wound that causes to a child and a family is cannot be allowed to continue. And so we have to come behind that and actively affirm and stand with these children and their families. Yeah, this is just wrong, and it's sin, and the church is responsible for it.
Yeah, Scott, I don't know if you know, but I have a 7-year-old little girl, Sophia, and you know, here at Cathedral of Hope in Dallas, we have many kids and transgender kids and transgender adults who are part of our community, and we could not be more proud of them and supportive of them as they continue to grow in their faith. You know, one of the things I teach my 7-year-old is that the name I gave her at birth may not be the name she has when she's older, and that you know, she has to express herself in the best way possible. And the thing that I really, really love about watching and being with her is that she has now the ability to move amongst the school system, to be educated in the best way. And I can only begin to imagine the effect that this has on a child who's in the school system, who is fighting every single day her own gender or his own gender identity or their own gender identity, and is now not being able to access just the possibility of learning, because this is part of the psyche of their existence in the school system. Because we're not isolated from everything else that's going on in the world, and we live in a state and a country where transgender women of color are being murdered at a much higher rate than any other population. You're right, Diane. This is a sin of the church, and I quite honestly remember, you know, if we look at church history, no social movement or social change in the United States has existed without voices of faith. And I call upon my colleagues to stop this rhetoric, stop this hypocrisy, to stop using the name of my God and my Jesus and the one who taught me to love one another. You know, Jesus said, you can't love somebody else unless you love yourself. And quite frankly, if this is the kind of love that we're offering to the world, it's a pretty messed up love. And I would tell people to get out of somebody else's life and figure out their own life before they start judging somebody else's. You know, I think take the speck out of your own eye or take the plank out of your own eye before you look at the speck in someone else's. I think we've turned that around, and we want to look at the speck in somebody else's, and we're ignoring everything else that's going on in our own lives. Let's get our own backyard sorted out first before we start trying to sort out somebody else's. of which we have no experience of and no first-hand information of. And you're right, Scott, this is not an issue. I've not heard of one issue of a transgender kid in school, in sports, causing a problem. So this is really just about our own agenda, our own bias, and a particular movement that is not just here in Texas. You know, we are seeing these boilerplate legislations existing now across the country, from ultra-conservative, evangelical, white, let's be honest, white privileged men, cisgender, who just want to force it because they know that this is the last grip they have on controlling America. And we as people of faith have got to raise above the pulpit, out onto the streets, and to do the work of social change. Legislators can do whatever they want as far as laws are concerned, but it's our job to do the hard work of changing hearts and minds. And we've done that with marriage equality. We're doing that around racism in our country. And we now have to stand shoulder to shoulder, do the heavy lifting for our transgender community, because it's hard enough just to live in the world without having to do the fighting as well. And it's our responsibility to do that fighting and to do that work that my faith tells me to do. I don't do this work in spite of my faith. I do this work because of my faith. And it's really important that people of faith understand that.
Naomi, I want to bring you in because we've talked a lot about the harm that takes place, right? And in my faith tradition, one of the 3 simple rules is do no harm, which should be like a pretty simple ask. But can you talk some about, and we've heard some of this, right? It's not just the policy that's harmful. It's the fact that we're continuing to have these conversations that is doing harm, even if the bill continues to fail. Right. Like, so can you say a word about the harm that even having these conversations has on children in our communities?
Absolutely. You know, when I was at the Capitol last time, one of the parents asked me, well, when they asked me this question, what do I say? I said, you know what? The problem with this is that we are harming children, but our harm can be death. To look at what Annaliese said, the rise in the suicide rate, to look at the amount of children who are being told daily that they are a mistake, that they're an abomination to God. You know, I'm a member of MCC, and MCC has a long history in the LGBTQ community. So for me, God has always been a rainbow God, a God of acceptance, a God that loves all the pieces and parts of who we are. And that acceptance of who we are is so crucial. So to constantly have that conversation to be heard when you pick up a newspaper or you watch TV, realize that this was so important that they had to go back for a 4th time and make an attempt to say that you were not a valuable part of our society, that you were not a valuable part of our school system. I talk about what happens when children play sports. You know, sports bring about leadership. They bring about the sense of being connected. And to take that away from a child for stuff that ain't science, you know, I think we've had a year or 2 where we can say, let's trust the science. We know what best practice is. We know what the evidence says. We know how to bring healthy children into the world. Stay out of my damn household. You know, I mean, when it comes right down to it, I am pretty sure that the only one I have to answer to at the end of the day is my heart and God. And both of us are cool. So I think you're the problem. And when we talk about them being the problem, the fact that they don't see it, that they think that this is some holy mission. You know, Jesus would not be welcome in most of these churches. He hung out with the wrong people. He didn't dress right. And just looking at that as a concept, realizing that you are attacking children, that this will, you know, even with the best of love and the best of caring, that message still gets in. And no parent should have to ever say they're wrong baby. I don't know what's going on. You are a perfect gift of God. My trans siblings are beautiful. They're magical. They show me that God still does magic each and every day. And I love that about my trans siblings. So I cannot understand how we are still having the same tired and angry conversation.
Thank you. So this next question I'm going to pose to all of you, and you all come from different spaces. I'll also add that Texas Impact will be obviously monitoring this legislative session. We'll be sending out rapid response notifications next Monday. We'll have a legislative update. We expect things to move. Well, we expected things to move quickly, but the House adjourned until Thursday, so at least it won't be that quick, I don't guess, on the House side. So next question for all of you, kind of short and long term. Short term being maybe, the next couple of weeks during this legislative session, but also longer term, this is going to continue to be a conversation we're going to be having. What do you hope listeners, what do you hope Texans of faith will be doing both short and long term? We'll go around the horn. We'll start with Annaliese this time.
Thanks, Scott. I think the most obvious place to start as a member of faith, of any faith tradition, is to call your legislators and specifically say, I am, a member of XYZ faith tradition, and this does not align with my values as a Texan of faith. And I am urging you to either vote no for the legislation, let it die completely. And the big ask here, thinking to the harm that we all just, testified to, stop putting it on any session. These bills don't need to come up again. You are causing harm. And my faith tradition, this is what my faith tradition says about harm. And I think it's really important when you call legislators, yes, call your House members, yes, call your senators. But I think there's a few things you can also do. One, make sure you follow up via email and then call them again and say, hey, you and I talked. I talked to a member of your staff. This is what we talked about. You said you weren't going to vote yes, or you said XYZ. Keep putting pressure on them. It actually does work. Whenever there are people in faith communities that are banding together, this happened with the bathroom bill. And a lot of people are calling this bathroom bill 2.0. The faith community killed the bathroom bill. We are a powerful force because everybody has these inherently linked values of non-discrimination and love and service, regardless of what faith tradition you ascribe to. The values that underline all of them say this is not okay. So I think that's one, putting pressure on your legislators. That's something you can do in the short term. Two, testifying during the session. I think that's always a great idea. I know sometimes right now in terms of safety, that's not not available to everybody, but there are lots of options to stay involved in the legislative process. Texas Impact gives people lots of different options to stay involved. So I would say in the short term too, to Scott's point, please stay connected with Texas Impact. There are lots of opportunities to have your voice heard. Three, I'm going to put this out here, write an op-ed. This is so huge. Having faith communities represented openly in public spaces, to say that we shouldn't be talking about politics or faith or politics and faith together, it's wrong. These are inherently linked. Politics impact our ability as faith communities to thrive, and we should be engaging and we should be doing it publicly. So I think those are three short-term asks that I would offer to listeners today. And then long-term, you have to make this a part of the culture of your religious institution. I think all of the speakers here today, again, I am a lay person and I am not a faith leader, but what I hear in my church is talking about these issues matters. It matters for a lot of different reasons. You have to shift the culture within the faith community to say every single person, regardless of gender identity, has a place here. And we are openly welcoming you on our website, on our, in our messages, et cetera. So I think you have to change the culture of your institution to think about that and examine your church policies. Are we being welcoming? How can we be more welcoming? Are we letting people know that this is a space for them, that they can come and thrive and grow along with sharing our faith traditions and religions? So that's what I would offer both in the short and long term. And I will also say I'm very happy that, my church and many churches have already made so many steps this way. There's already so much progress being made, and that may not be the loudest voice. I understand that sometimes the extremists are louder, but the reality is that many churches are already doing all of the right things. And that needs to be, we need to have our voices just as loud.
Two things before I pitch to the next person. Number one, Annaliese will have an argument offline about whether or not we can consider you a faith leader, but I bet after today we can find a couple hundred people who will email in and say, yeah, she's all right. To the point, I'm going to put my policy hat back on for a second. To the point about calling your representative, there's some of you who are thinking, well, my person is, I believe my person believes this. Y'all, there are a lot of these representatives who will say one thing out loud and in campaign literature and behind closed doors will advocate for the right thing. And so go ahead and have those conversations. And it's important to have them, even if you believe that you know where your representative is. So that's my word of advice for today. I'm going to go ahead and go around the horn as I see you on my Zoom screen. Neil, short, long term.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think I agree with everything Annaliese said, and so I'm not going to repeat it. I think the other thing that I would say to my conservative friends and those who perhaps hold opposing views or are just towing the party line is educate yourself. Talk to parents who've got trans kids. Talk to faith leaders that perhaps they'd less agree with. Let's have a much, much broader conversation, because when you actually get in the same room together, you ultimately come to an understanding, I think, which is perhaps different than you held originally. And I get tired of people who just do what their pastor told them from the pulpit, and who just swallow a line, hook, line, and sinker, without having their own thought or their own opportunity to really delve into this topic. And I just want to add that to this. I mean, I agree with absolutely everything else that's already been said, but let's get together and really start to educate ourselves on what it really means to be transgender, without all of the assumptions of the popular press or a bully pulpit or a toxic theology that continues to manifest itself in so many pulpits on Sundays specifically. Because you don't get so much of this in other faiths. It really is in this this white evangelical conservative space. And I just want to encourage my colleagues. And to your point, Scott, I have many clergy friends on that side of the fence who have very different conversations with me behind closed doors. But they can't say it in public because they rely on the donations of their congregation. I don't know, that sounds like hypocrisy to me, but who am I to judge? So let's have some conversations and some real assessment of what it means to be transgender. Walk a mile in someone else's shoes before you make a judgment on what this is really about.
Thanks. Thank you. Diane, short term, long term, anything to add?
I just, I would affirm what they've said. I guess I would say to our folks, the power of our voices, we've seen the power of our voices. And I think a lot of us are timid because I don't know what to say. Everything. Just call. You'll be fine. They need to hear from you. Even those who are supportive of resisting this bill need us to support them. They need us behind them. And those of us, those who aren't need to hear from us. And then we need to get the vote out again. Next time we have a chance, we know we can do this, and we're all exhausted from it, and it's hard work. But the lives and future of children is at stake here. And so what more important thing could we do? So I just would affirm that. I would also say that those of us who understand the gospel or whatever our faith tradition as this wide, inclusive welcome of diversity, not something that's a threat, but something that actually should be encouraged and celebrated, that we all benefit from. We've got to be proactive in educating people. We've got to help people understand that what they're being taught about the Bible isn't true. We need to create an alternative faith narrative that people can enter, that then gives them, some authority, gives them some tools to work with, because I think there are a lot of people out there who've never heard the alternative, so like in October, we're offering a Gender 101 course, and a couple of parents of transgender children are going to come and talk to even us as, progressive as we are. I know there are things we don't really fully understand. I think we need to provide materials to people. I was thinking about there's a powerful novel called This Is the Way It Always Is by Lori Frankel that actually tells the story of a transgender child and family. And so that's another way that people can be opened up, so we need to be assertive in getting information out and giving people an alternative, because I think a lot of people are looking for permission to stand up and they haven't been given it. And when we stand up, every time we stand up for a transgender child, it matters. They hear an alternative voice. And so whether we're clergy or laity, speaking matters, and how, speaking into this matters. Whether or not we win the day, there are children listening, and that one voice could make all the difference in their future and how they, this is child abuse. I'm sorry, but anytime we interfere with a child's ability to relate to God, we are engaging in spiritual abuse, and we cannot tolerate that. These children need to know how deeply they are loved and celebrated by God. And so it's our job as faith leaders to intervene here.
Right. And Naomi, short-term, long-term.
So short-term, be brave and be bold. Be okay with being uncomfortable. That's when the learning begins. When we are listening to what's happening around us and we're okay being uncomfortable. Be in that space where you may be the only voice that's speaking truth to power. As a queer woman of color in America, who happens to also believe in God and believe that I am actually called by God, there are times when I have to walk in the door terrified, but damn it, I'm still going through that door. Because I know my voice might be the only voice in the room that's making any real sense. And somebody is listening. Also, long-term, watch where your money goes. Do not support hate, whether it is outright or, hidden. We need to watch where we put our money. I will never forget, I left a church because in the middle of prayer, they advocated something that I was like, are you out of your mind? I never went back to that church. And I had been at that church for a while. So paying attention, realizing where I put my money is also where there is power. And by all means, vote. We have the ability to make change in Texas, and that's why they're so scared. If anything, we see that loud and clear.
Amen. Well, y'all, I really do appreciate y'all taking the time and having this important conversation today. Y'all had me taking notes, and I'm going to go back and listen to this again later. But really do appreciate y'all taking the time. More, I appreciate the time you're doing each and every day on behalf of all Texans, but especially transgender children and families during this time. I want to give you a chance just before we close out to either offer a shameless plug, free chance to promote whatever's going on, or a closing thought before I close us out today. So we'll go reverse order from last time. Naomi, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So I'm going to plug the Pride Center because we have case management. And a lot of what we do is we get almost 80% of our case management is actually trans youth and trans folks who are in crisis for one reason or another and don't feel celebrated and don't feel like they can do what needs to be done to be successful, to be happy, to be what God meant them to be. And it hurts my heart every time I have to have a conversation and say, You're exactly what God wanted you to be. Perfectly made in God's image, whatever that God is to you. You are perfectly made. So I would certainly say to find organizations in your community who are doing that work.
And where do we find you?
You can find us pride-center-sa.org. It'd be the easiest way. But we actually are still virtual. But if you go into our website, there's still a lot of things that you can become a part of. We have an Icons Brunch coming in November, which is a great way to support the center. And I'm always looking for silent auction items.
There you go. All right. Thank you. Diane.
So as a clergy person in the institutional church, I want to ask forgiveness of every trans child and every family that's had to deal with this and that's been harmed by the church. And Bering, I'm the senior pastor of Bering Memorial United Church of Christ. We just left the United Methodist Church after 173 years because this is really important. It is critically important, and it's not worth any institutional alliance to harm children. And so to all of our transgender children, you are awesome. You are a gift, not only to yourself, but you're a gift to all of us. God, in God's creative choice, decided that the world needed you, that we needed you, that the church needed you. And so if you're in the Houston area and you need a faith home, Bering Church will celebrate you because you are worthy of being celebrated and we need you. And that's the message that God wants to give out through the church. And so my prayer is that we will heal this horrible harm that we've done and that we'll continue to affirm the goodness and just beauty of all of our transgender children as well as adults and families. And thank you to the parents who have had the courage to stand up for their children, because I know it's been really hard. And so, yeah.
Thank you, Diane. Neil?
Cathedral of Hope is a United Church of Christ as well. And so, Diane, I know you've just joined us and we're in the same conference. And so awesome to make your acquaintance. Of course, Naomi, I've known for a long time. In my association with MCC, I'm duly ordained in both denominations. And Annaliese, I feel like I've made a new friend today, so thank you. If you're looking for resources and you're in Dallas, of course, Cathedral of Hope is known as the largest predominantly LGBT congregation in the country. And we want to welcome you to worship with us. And we're doing in-person and online. And of course, you're always welcome to drop in online or in person to come and worship with us. But more than that, on our website, we have a tremendous amount of resources for folks who are trying to reconcile their sexuality, their gender identity, and their faith. And so we want to encourage you to use those resources. And then some of you may have recently read that we acquired Believe Out Loud, which is an international platform online, over 210,000 followers who are both Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, Baha'i, Hindu, folks from many different traditions who are also working together to reconcile their own sexuality, gender identity, and their faith. And so we want you to know that there are a lot of resources available to you. I said about educating yourself. Go onto these websites. Go and actually read what we believe the Scripture says about who you are and about how loved you are and how wonderfully and magnificently you are made in the divine image of God that is beyond gender and gender identity. And just educate yourself and know that you are perfect just the way you are. And from that place, we can then accept the perfection in others. So please do go on, check out the resources, educate yourself, read your Bibles through the lens of grace and love rather than through the hate and discrimination that so often we read these texts from. And know that there are just as many progressive voices out there who are aligning themselves with the message of Jesus. Not the message of the church. There's a big difference between churchianity and Christianity. And let's get back to what it really means. If we're following Jesus, let's get back to what it means to be a follower of Jesus, and the challenge that places on our life every single day to do the right thing.
And thank you, Neil. Last but not least, Annaliese.
Well, I will follow in my colleagues' footsteps here and offer First Unitarian Universalist Church of San Antonio as a place for refuge if you are in the San Antonio or surrounding areas. Just my personal story, I grew up very evangelical, and I stepped away from the church, and I thought there's just simply there's no way I can continue in any faith tradition because of how that harmed me growing up as a child. And it was really beautiful, actually, finding a place that I thought, this is what I am. I had no words to describe how I felt about myself, how I felt about my connection to spirituality. And coming into First UU San Antonio gave me the language that I needed to feel like I was accepted and included, and that I had a faith tradition that made sense to me. And so I want to offer that because Unitarian Universalists actually are very affirming of all faith traditions, if that's something that you didn't know about us. We feel like as long as your faith tradition does not harm another person, we are good. We love it. We are here for it. And so if that seems to resonate with you, as one of the original churches who have been affirming of LGBTQ plus people for a very, very long time, before everybody sort of turned their logos into rainbows and got on board, we were there, sort of in that space saying, we're here for you. And I want you to know we're still here for you. So that's number one. Number two, I just really want to affirm that you have places that you can advocate. If you've listened to this and you think, where do I go from here? How do I get connected now that we're in a fourth session? And I feel like I have the time and energy to focus on this. You have places to do that. An obvious one is Texas Impact. And please enroll in those legislative engagement groups. They are really, really helpful when you know what everybody else is saying to the same, House member or senator that you're talking to. It's really helpful to know that there's a group banded together, kind of using the same voice and the same messages. And then also, I want to plug Equality Texas, which is the largest advocacy group for LGBTQ Texans, and they have been the most amazing advocates that I've ever had the opportunity to work with. I know personally, when you work with nonprofits, the work that you do is personal. And so the people at Equality Texas have lifted us up as a community so much, despite experiencing the same level of harm themselves. Even through that pain, they are pushing through and they are holding us close, and they have a seat for you at the table too. So if any of this has made you feel activated and engaged, there are so many places that you can go to with that activation. And that's just a couple that I would encourage you to check out.
Well, thank you all once again. This has been an incredible conversation, and you are all incredible faith leaders and advocates, and I really do appreciate the work you're doing every day. And friends, thank you all for tuning in today. I hope that you have heard a challenge today. We have up to 30 days for this third special session, and we need Texans of faith lighting up the telephone calls, talking with your friends and neighbors, and calling both your representatives and Annaliese threw down the challenge to maybe consider writing an op-ed. So we've got work to do, and if you need help figuring out how to engage, you can always reach out at scott@texasimpact.org and make sure that you're signing up for the rapid response team and legislative engagement groups at texasimpact.org. And finally, if you've stayed with us this long, please make sure that you are rating and reviewing this episode and other Weekly Witness episodes so more of your friends can find it. You can find this on YouTube, Facebook, and in any podcast source. So make sure that you're sharing it with your congregations to extend the challenge outward. Finally, remember to keep an eye on Texas Impact social media for upcoming announcements, or email me at scott@texasimpact.org for questions. And remember, if you appreciate Texas Impact and the Weekly Witness community, please make sure that you and your congregation are members by going to texasimpact.org/join. Friends, these are unprecedented times with now a fourth bite at the apple at harmful legislation and everything else that's going on. The world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.